seeking a solution. As talks continue between Ukraine and Russia, the military conflict enters its fourth week. We have the latest, plus analysis on when and how the violence might end. Fight for the unborn. 2 U.S. states advance pro-life protections. And green energy. A closer look at the holiness and zeal of Ireland's patron. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, March 17th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this Feast of St. Patrick. I'm Tracy Sabol. Delegations from Ukraine and Russia hold another round of talks. Both sides say progress is being made. Ukraine is asking for a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian troops. The Kremlin wants NATO to agree not to admit Ukraine nor allow its forces in the country. Still, amid the hopeful signs, the military combat continues. Pope Francis has sent a representative to visit refugees fleeing the violence.
So I greet you from the border, which is, Pope Francis says, should be a place of encounter.
Cardinal Michael Czerny is in Slovakia. He met with church leaders and visited facilities for refugees. Last week, Cardinal Czerny was on Ukraine's border with Hungary. Both trips were at the request of the Holy Father. With the ongoing war in Ukraine, countries, including the U.S., have donated significant amounts of money and defense equipment. But there are concerns from some that it will pull more countries into the conflict. And joining me now is John Daniel Davidson, senior editor at the Federalist. John, welcome. So good to have you on today. Yesterday, as you know, President Biden announced $800 million of assistance to Ukraine in the form of military assistance, everything from arms and ammunition to missiles. However, some think this isn't enough. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that we've already provided an unprecedented level of military assistance to Ukraine, not just the $800 million that Biden announced yesterday, but since the conflict began, the administration has committed some $2 billion in security assistance to Ukraine. And this goes back also to the Trump administration as well, and the provision of arms to the Ukrainians. But we're seeing calls now for more and more advanced weapon systems, and indeed the transfer of fighter jets and advanced long-range surface-to-air missile systems to the Ukrainians as well. We've never done anything like that before. And what's striking about this is that our lawmakers and the people who are calling for this level of assistance are refusing to acknowledge that there is some inherent risk in us ratcheting up our aid to Ukraine in this way, that we might be drawn into this war as a result.
Yeah, John, let's talk about that risk.
Well, I mean, the risk is that Russia is a great power and a nuclear power. And I think it's a little bit naive to think that we can increase and keep ratcheting up our assistance to the Ukrainians, whether through the provision of more and more advanced weapons, intelligence, targeting intelligence, things like transferring MiG-29 fighter jets from Eastern European countries into Ukraine, and how exactly is that going to be done? Are they going to fly from air bases in Eastern Europe into Ukraine and then hit Russian targets? And we're just going to expect Moscow to accept that and not do anything in response. What disturbs me is that we're not even having a debate about this. The people who are calling for this escalation on the part of the West, on the part of the U.S. and NATO allies, are not even acknowledging that there is a risk involved. Just acknowledge that there's a risk and then make a case for why it's worth the risk. But instead, we're not having a debate about it.
Yeah, besides the current strategy, in supplying the weaponry to Ukraine, do you think there's another option, another way the U.S. can help and hopefully de-escalate the situation?
Well, one of the things that we need to do is to get clarity about what our end state goal is for this war and outline what we think some off-ramps might be. The U.S. could take a leadership role in trying to broker a negotiated settlement. That's how this war is going to end. It's going to end through negotiations. And so we need to be conveying to the Russians what a negotiated settlement might look like, how we could help in that. Should be doing the same for the Ukrainians. Israel is doing that right now. Israel is trying to broker some kind of a settlement between the two sides. We're not doing that. We haven't even outlined off ramps for the sanctions that we've imposed on Russia. There's nothing that Russia could do right now that might end those sanctions. And so we're communicating confusion and contradictory policies, not just to Russia, but to the whole world. Like, we don't really know what our strategy is here for how this war is supposed to end. And so I think we need to start talking about that. We need to get clear about that. And then we need to convey that to the world at large, but also specifically to the leaders of Ukraine and Russia, because at some point the war is going to come to an end, and it's going to come to an end through a negotiated settlement. And we need to help make that happen as soon as possible.
Joe, we have probably about a minute or so left, but I'm curious, what concerns you the most at this time about what is going on in Ukraine, and where do you see this all going?
What concerns me most is that the fighting in Ukraine is going to get worse, and the Russian bombardment of Ukrainian cities and the targeting of civilians is going to get worse. And my concern right now is that the United States and NATO are giving the Ukrainians false hope. And we are encouraging them to continue to fight and continue to have their civilian centers bombarded by Russia in the false hope that we're going to come to their aid, or that we're going to impose a no-fly zone, or that we're going to go to war with Russia to put an end to this. I think we need to get realistic with ourselves and also with the Ukrainians, and begin the process of trying to broker a peace deal that brings an end to the horrible fighting over there, because it's going to get worse unless we are able to contribute to a process that will bring it to an end, so that the horrible suffering that we see online and on our televisions can come to an end as quickly as possible.
Well, John, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much for coming on today. Great to get your perspective.
Thanks for having me.
President Joe Biden was supposed to discuss the war in Ukraine with Ireland's Prime Minister in person, but COVID upended those plans. Prime Minister Martin learned that he caught the virus last night while at another event with the president. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, on this St. Patrick's Day, COVID-19 brought some bad luck to the meeting between the two world leaders, so President Biden and the Prime Minister of Ireland had to go virtual.
Each wearing a green tie with a shamrock bowl between them, President Joe Biden visits virtually with Ireland's Prime Minister. Micheál Martin said he's feeling good despite his COVID-19 infection. And on this St. Patrick's Day,
we're meeting in a moment when demands on unity in the world are really accelerating. We have to be united, and we certainly are.
In Ukraine, Russia continues its deadly invasion. In the city of Chernihiv in northern Ukraine, a family of 5, including 3-year-old twins, killed in what Ukrainian authorities said was a Russian strike. The president of Ukraine trying to keep up morale, delivering flowers today to a young patient in a hospital.
Putin's brutality and what he's doing and his troops are doing in Ukraine is just inhumane.
And I share with you our horror at the barbaric attack on the civilians of Ukraine.
President Biden also praised Ireland for taking in thousands of Ukrainian refugees.
I just want to say one thing while the president's here before they leave, and that is what Ireland is doing now, what you are doing, taking in Ukrainian refugees, speaks so loudly about your principles. And it's amazing.
Later, at the U.S. Capitol, in a lighter moment, President Biden spoke at the annual Friends of Ireland luncheon.
My grandfather, Ambrose Finnegan, used to say, and I mean this, he'd say, Joey, if you're lucky enough to be Irish, you're lucky enough.
Now, tomorrow, Friday, President Biden will speak by phone with China President Xi Jinping about Ukraine. And then next week, President Biden heads to Europe to meet with NATO allies. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, why the Vatican is taking part in a major event in Dubai. Cardinal George Pell says the Catholic Church must adhere to teachings on priesthood and human sexuality despite cultural pressures. He wants the Vatican to discipline 2 European bishops whose public comments about synodal path discussions have supported changes. Our World's Fair is taking place in Dubai until the end of the month, and Saturday, one of the main attractions will feature the Vatican. The Dubai Expo began last October. It was postponed for 1 year because of the coronavirus. The gathering's theme is Connecting Minds, Creating the Future. It features exhibitions from nearly 200 countries, including the Holy See. EWTN News Rome correspondent Colin Flynn joins us now from Dubai. Colin, great to see you. So tell us a little bit more about this expo.
A very good evening, Tracy, from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates on the Arabian Peninsula. And this country, the Emirates, it borders Saudi Arabia and Oman. And over the past 10 or 15 years, this city, Tracy, Dubai, has really risen up from the desert sand to become an incredibly modern and diverse city, and is now home to people from all over the world. In fact, since 2005, the country's population has doubled. And wanting to truly mark its place on the global stage, this year Dubai is playing host to the world-famous Dubai Expo. Really what this is, Tracy, is a city within a city, with nations from all around the world setting up pavilions to showcase the very best of what their country has to offer. So the latest technological advances, the pinnacles of culture and cuisine, or fashion, business, you name it, it's here. The Expo has seen 17 million visitors, so even through COVID, a massive success. There are 192 countries taking part, and the Vatican, being an independent state and a member of the family of nations, it too has a pavilion here.
And Colin, can you tell us more about the Vatican's pavilion? What's the theme, and what can people expect to see and experience there?
Well, the theme of the Vatican's pavilion is deepening the connection, and inside it is really stunning. It was commissioned by Monsignor Thomas Trafni, who is the head of the Science and Faith Department of the Vatican's Pontifical Council for Culture. And he said that the aim of the Vatican's pavilion was to be a point where one could encounter beautiful aesthetics, science and faith all in one place, which he said would hopefully promote intercultural and interreligious dialogue. Now inside you'll find precious manuscripts, more than 1,000 years old, that have left the Vatican archives for the very first time just to be displayed here. There's also beautiful religious art depicting important moments in the Church's history. Words, of course, from Pope Francis, information on the Swiss Guard, and much more. And as we know, Tracy, countries have national days. Like today, my nation, Ireland, is celebrating St. Patrick's Day. But on Saturday, March 19th, that's this Saturday, the Holy See will be marking Vatican Day by sending Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, to the Expo, where he will meet with ministers and top government officials from the United Arab Emirates. Deepening the connection, the theme of the pavilion, is what we believe the aim of these high-level meetings will be. Deepening relations between the Catholic Church and the United Arab Emirates, so between Islam and Christianity, of course, very important here in an Islamic state. And
Colin, I also understand the focal point of the pavilion are symbols of 2 key meetings in the Church's history with the Islamic community. What more can you tell us about that?
That's right. It's really fascinating because inside the pavilion there are symbols of 2 historical meetings, one between Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Alcazar, that's Aman al-Tayyib. That happened in Abu Dhabi in 2019. But the other one, Tracy, goes back 800 years when in the 13th century St. Francis met the Sultan of Egypt, Malik al-Kamil. Now that meeting is considered to be the foundation of relations between the Franciscan Fathers and the Islamic community, where after that they were allowed to have their own churches, let's say, within Islamic settlements. So following in these footsteps, the Vatican is hoping that their pavilion here will help people realize that friendship does and can exist between people of the 2 faiths and all faiths. And just to mention, we will have a full report on Cardinal Parolin's meeting and a look more in-depth at the Vatican Pavilion next week on EWTN News In Depth. But until then, that is it from the Expo here in Dubai. Back to you, Tracy.
And we are looking forward to that. Thank you so much, Colin. Colin Flynn, EWTN News Rome Correspondent from Dubai. Thank you again, Colin. By a vote of 31-6, Kentucky's Senate has passed a bill to ban abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. It is similar to Mississippi's heartbeat law, which is under review by the Supreme Court. The measure moves next to the Kentucky House, which has a pro-life majority. Missouri is preparing to debate a bill that would make it illegal to aid or abet evasion of its pro-life laws, even if an abortion is performed across state lines. The measure would be enforced by civil suits, a sanction modeled after the Texas heartbeat law. Meanwhile, in a corporate response to states which are passing pro-life laws, Citigroup is now covering travel expenses for its employees who seek an abortion. The policy was announced in a letter to shareholders from its annual proxy statement. The banking firm is not offering further comment. The so-called benefit began this year, making Citi among the first mega corporations to provide reimbursements for an abortion. And joining me now is Prudence Robertson, host of EWTN's ProLife Weekly. Prudence, welcome back. Great to see you. We have a lot to talk about today, but I want to start off with Citigroup and that so-called benefit that it's offering employees seeking abortions out of state. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yes, absolutely. It's very unfortunate that we're seeing big tech corporations, large corporations that have a lot of sway in the culture today, taking the side of the pro-abortion industry to really just exploit women, to put them in danger more and more every day. And this is simply a result of the fact that these companies, these organizations, the pro-abortion industry knows that Roe is under threat. You know, Roe versus Wade could be overturned in a matter of months. And states are taking every opportunity that they can to enforce pro-life laws that respect the will of the people across the country. The majority of them believe that Roe versus Wade is out of step. The majority of countries around the world limit abortion, at least at some point. Here in the United States, we have no limit at all. And this is just a reaction to the fact that the nation and the world is surging towards life. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah, Prudence, there's a bill being considered in Maryland called Senate Bill 669, or the Pregnant Persons Freedom Act of 2022, and it's causing a lot of concern, especially among pro-life advocates, some whom say this bill, if passed, could basically legalize infanticide. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, unfortunately, this isn't the first time we've seen a state pull a pro-abortion push as radical as this. You know, in Virginia, before we had a pro-life governor in Glenn Youngkin, they had passed a bill to allow infanticide. Governor Northam endorsed that wholeheartedly, and it's not surprising to see a state like Maryland, which is very blue, doing the same thing. We're seeing Colorado push similar measures to really just enforce abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. And this extremism, you know, it violates the rights of these unborn children in the womb, and it points to a deeper problem in our culture. I'm so glad that people like Monse Alvarado of News in Depth and others are really digging into what it's going to take to change the culture in these deep blue areas, because really at the end of the day, it's about understanding that these children in the womb have just as much of a right to live as you or I do, and their dignity and their humanity needs to be recognized.
Absolutely. We don't have a whole lot of time left, Prudence, but quickly, before I let you go,
Sure.
Tell us what you have coming up tonight on ProLife Weekly.
Yes, well, I would love for everyone to tune in on our St. Patrick's Day show. We are covering both international and national abortion news. We'll head to Guatemala and Hungary for some pro-life updates, and also hear about the World Health Organization's new guidelines that expand abortion access. We'll also be covering what's going on with the omnibus spending bill that passed in the House last week, and a very interesting Speak Out segment as well that I hope everyone will tune in for.
All right, well, we're looking forward to it. Prince, thank you so much for your time today and speaking with us. We appreciate
Tracy.
it.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Up next, celebrations from around the world for St. Patrick's Day. Plus, a closer look at the saint and his life. Display of the color green is a traditional expression of St. Patrick's Day, even in unexpected locations such as City Hall in Bangkok, Thailand. The special illumination is part of an annual promotion called Global Greening. It is an initiative from Tourism Ireland, which invites buildings and landmarks to be lit in the color of the Emerald Isle. Well, as many places around the world celebrate today, it is important to highlight the saint behind it all. I recently spoke with EWTN's Father Patrick Mary to discuss the life of St. Patrick, including his conversion story and how he evangelized Ireland. And joining me now to discuss is Father Patrick Mary Russell, Vocation Director for the Franciscan Missionaries of the Eternal Word. Father Patrick, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tracy. It's good to be with you.
So let's talk a little bit more about St. Patrick and also his conversion story.
Sure. So we know it's a great blessing because we have some of the writings of St. Patrick that have been passed down through the centuries. And one of those that we get a lot of information from is his own, what's called a confessio, or his own confession that he wrote, basically how God had worked through his life. And we know that he was born in the late 4th century. And he mentions that when he was 16, that he said, "I did not know the true God." So he admits that he was not close to God. Very interestingly, he mentioned also that his dad was a deacon, his grandfather was a priest. So again, he was a free decision of his. He just said, I did not know the true God. So he was doing his own thing. But something we know traumatic happened to him when he was 16. There were some Irish pirates that came over. It's believed that Patrick he grew up in the west coast of Britain, on the west side of Britain. And so he was captured, basically kidnapped by these Irish pirates, taken back to Ireland and sold into slavery. And it was in the midst of that, like he was over there for 6 years, and his responsibility was to basically be a shepherd as a slave. And it was in the midst of those 6 years that he had a conversion experience, that he received the gift of faith and the gift of prayer. And he developed a great love for prayer. And he had an encounter with God. He felt inspired. The Lord was leading him to his escape. And he was able to get back to home, again, with this renewed zeal, this renewed love for God and his faith. What was very interesting is in the midst of that, he had a vision and a dream that the Irish were calling him back. And you can only imagine how difficult that may have been because of his traumatic experience over there. But it was in the midst of that he again was discerning, felt the call to the priesthood, was trained. He was ordained as a priest, was consecrated as a bishop, and was sent to Ireland.
We know he also had a lot of sufferings along the way.
He did, and it's a great lesson and inspiration for us too. With our faith, that we know that God can bring, He's able to bring good out of evil and out of suffering. There's been, I remember listening to a talk on the life of St. Patrick, and a parallel was made between Patrick and Joseph from the Old Testament in the book of Genesis. That Joseph, we know, was basically betrayed by his brothers. He was sold into slavery into a foreign country, but it was through that great suffering, that traumatic experience, that he ended up saving that foreign country. He saved Egypt during a time of famine, and he also saved his own people, his own family. So Patrick was kidnapped into a foreign country, was sold as a slave. He eventually would go back and bring salvation, the saving message of the gospel, to Ireland, the very country where he was a slave. But also we know that as time went on and the faith really grew in Ireland, Ireland would send out missionaries throughout the entire world. And so he would go back to his own home country, that missionaries would go there and just bring the faith. And we see again God's providence. It was also, when he was in this foreign country, he learned the language, which seems like very practical, very small, but again, that would be helpful when he went back to preach and to bring the faith.
Yeah, definitely. And we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I do want to talk about his evangelization efforts too.
Sure. So, that's the thing too. We look at how the Lord used him. Again, it starts with his own conviction of the truths of our faith, and then when we have that, we want to pass it on to everyone else. So that's what he went through. Much suffering. He was not only this traumatic experience as a young man, but he was also betrayed by a friend of his from the past, whom he confided something that he was really struggling with. His friend betrayed him. It caused him a lot of suffering. So he went through many trials, but again, it's his love for Christ and the knowing God's mercy for his own soul that he wanted to pass that saving message to many others, and he would nonstop preaching the faith, until his death.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to share about St. Patrick?
Sure.
That maybe, I know there's a lot of things about St. Patrick that maybe aren't true or people don't know or those type of things.
Yeah. So very quickly, a lot of things that are associated with him are driving snakes out of Ireland. I was just reading recently, I don't think that wasn't written into any accounts of his life until I believe it was like over 200 years after his death. So as far as how authentic that is, I don't know. I can't say that. There's also the shamrock, it's often associated with him. I don't think that's in his own personal writings. I don't know how that was woven into the accounts of his life, but he certainly had a profound sense of the Trinity, which the shamrock is often used to explain. I will say, though, that one thing with Patrick is that he had such a great love for Scripture, and his Confessions, which is only like 60-something paragraphs explaining his life, scholars have found like over 100 references or quotes from Scripture in that. And he says, he starts off saying, I, Patrick, a sinner and unlearned man. So he wasn't a scholar, but you could tell he was so steeped in Scripture, he like lived and breathed it, that it just came out when he was writing about his life. And I think that's a good example for us, that we should be really familiar with the Bible, with sacred Scripture, as it guides us.
Absolutely. Well, Father Patrick, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us about St. Patrick. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much. And we thank you for watching tonight. And we leave you with a St. Patrick's Day parade in Dublin, Ireland. Enjoy. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night and God bless and happy St. Patrick's Day.